All right, I'll record.
So there's a few things to know about gouache. So unlike acrylic, the binder in this is, what do you think it is? I said it on
Chemical reaction.
Monday. It's a chemical reaction. You remember the name of what the binder is
I
called?
can't recall.
Gum arabic, yes. The same thing that's in watercolor. The main difference between gouache and watercolor is that gouache has silica in it. So it has like this chalkiness. So silica is found in clay. If you are exposed to too much clay dust, you can get something called silicosis, and it is bad.
Is that also what silicone, like gel packets are made out of?
Probably, yeah. Do not eat. With your Himi set, you can scoop out different colors and mix them up on your palette. Because I've let mine dry out, what I typically do is I'll choose a color, I'll really flood the color with water, and then I'll take a section of my palette and I'll put some color down, and then I'll mix up another color. One of my favorite ways of using this is mixing my own colors between the two. You probably don't have to do quite as much mixing as you're used to with your acrylics, because you've got greens, you've got like secondary colors, you've got all sorts of tones to use. One quick tip is that, so you have a black and you have this dark blue. Instead of using the black for black, try using this really dark blue and this really dark brown. And it's gonna make, I mean, first of all, this blue is just like so rich and beautiful.
Why can't we use the black?
Well, I think that when you make your own chromatic black, it will inject way more life into your shadows. And when you make your own black, you can also modify it in a lot more interesting ways. So when I take a lot of this really dark brown and mix it with my blue, check it out. It's like an instant black paint, but it is packed with chroma because of the fact that it was made using that dark blue and that dark brown. I really recommend mixing your color, explore. Maybe you want to even just take your sketchbook and do one page where you're just like mixing color and making swatches, and like maybe it's just an abstract page of doodles and marks where you're just playing with all the possibilities for how these colors interact with each other. But in terms of starting your painting, the underpainting process is going to be a little different from when you're making an acrylic or oil painting. So I really like to make a drawing with colored pencil. I have a bunch of colored pencils and also some like colored micron pens with me today that y'all can use if you want. But I drew from my collage, and I basically just did a contour line drawing of the entire piece. I didn't get into too much detail. Really what I'm doing, just like in an underpainting, is I was using my contour lines to just give me a roadmap of how things are going to interact in the composition, the proportions of things, where things are in relationship to the other things. And after I have my drawing down, I can get painting. But using typical underpainting processes with gouache isn't ideal for a few reasons. One of them is because when you paint with gouache, it's going to be re-wettable. So the underpainting won't necessarily be locked in. So if, let's say I did a bright red underpainting with gouache, and then I wanted to paint other tones on top of it, that red paint is going to be re-wet. So let's say I wanted to paint my white flowers. If I had a red outline with gouache, it would seep into my white paint, and it would be really difficult for me to get the colors I want. So I really recommend doing more of a drawing as your base. So this might be on your wood panel or your canvas. Remember, it can't be, wood panel or paper. Remember, it can't be canvas or any other primed surface. Don't gesso your surface this time. In this example, I started with working really thin. So I started with the sort of like sunset behind everything, which is kind of like this peachy tone, because I'm imagining that that's like the thing that's furthest away. That being said, you don't really need to work from back to front anymore. I could start with the front and work my way to the back. So instead of coating the entire canvas with my my peach tone, like I might with acrylics, I'm actually taking a much more sort of like careful approach where I'm approaching different sections of the painting individually, which is kind of, you know, different from a lot of the things that I've taught you so far, which has been all about work general to specific, block in big shapes, block out the entire canvas with value first, and then build it up in layers. But with gouache, we kind of want to take a more sort of conservative route with our paint. And we want to start out thin and also really think about getting those colors exactly the way you want them from the get-go, rather than building it and layering it and glazing it into being the colors you want. It means you're approaching your composition a little bit more like piecemeal, like piece by piece, to build up the overall composition. That being said, I still am working in layers sometimes. So you are still going to need to consider the idea of general to specific. So for these flowers, these orchids, they have these really interesting like spots on them. But they also, and I actually started one of them by just going straight in with my dark red dots. But then I realized that I needed to add some of the shadows of the sort of, it's almost like a grayish tone in the shadows of where the petals are interacting with each other. Maybe there's like a shadow from where one petal is moving back in space, or one is sitting on top of another. So then I realized that I actually needed to mix up some gray tones. And you'll also find that like the white in here looks very different than the white of your page. So I'm actually deciding to preserve some of the white of my page in order to let it really shine as bright as I can, because the white in my palette, partially because it's very dirty and I've been painting and mixing quite a bit. This is a little bit more of, so this is like what my white looks like from my gouache next to the white of my paper. So yes, it's white, but it's kind of dirty and chalky compared to this like bright, shining.
It's off-white.
Yeah, it's more of an off-white, and I think partially that's my fault because I didn't keep it clean enough. It probably is a different story if you're really, really clean about it. That being said, I recommend thinking about if there are any moments that you want to be bright white, try to avoid painting them at all. Let the white of your page shine through. You can even use a masking fluid to mask off, or like a frisket. The only thing is if you do use a masking fluid, I can bring some in on Tuesday for y'all to try if you want. But basically it's like a latex that you apply onto your paper, and it'll create a mask or a resist. So when you paint around it, or when you paint over it, it's not going to allow any of the color to get through that section of the paper. And then you can peel off the latex at the end. The only thing to keep in mind is it'll absolutely destroy your paintbrushes. So if you use like a wax, or sorry, a masking fluid or a frisket, I recommend using like the back of your paintbrush to apply it, or like a toothpick, or anything but a paintbrush.
Don't use your nice brushes.
Yes, and even your crappy brushes, you can't really get it off at all. It'll really destroy them. But I really recommend thinking about moving a little bit slower and lighter, a little bit more like a watercolor painter for the first few layers, and then getting into detail. So instead of working from back to front and dark to light like you might have from with acrylic. I instead like to generally work light to dark, at least for the sections that have like gradients of light and detail moving around them. For these sections that I knew I just wanted them like a solid dark shape, I just went ahead in with my dark tones. But generally you can really build this stuff up from thin to thick and allow your gradients to come through the layering process. So I recommend letting each layer dry before going back over a certain section. But you'll notice like for this rocky section at the bottom, I've gone through and started layering color, and I even have a really dark color here that I layered some of that bright cadmium red on top of. And I think that worked really well to create some of that sense of the sort of rocky texture, but also the light on the rocks. That being said, generally with gouache, because you might be using it a little bit thinner than acrylic, and you might not be able to totally cover up another color, working light to dark will be helpful so that let's say I wanted to make this really bright yellow for these flowers. If I had just painted that all dark green to work from back to front, I wouldn't be able to get that yellow on top of that green very well. So preserving the transparency of your page sometimes is going to really work to your benefit, even though it is a more opaque material than watercolor. You still have to be thoughtful about where does like the light of your paper shine through to make you have the most vibrancy that you need. Yeah.
When we're working on wood panels, do you think that we should go ahead first with like a layer of just pure white?
Good question. You could, depending on your image, but it will mix with any of your colors. So if you know you want to have a very pastel image, then you could totally cover it with white gouache. But what I would do is actually, with your wood panel, is I would, you can use the color of your wood as a color in your painting if you want. So you can, kind of like how I said, you can preserve the white of your page. Let's say your wood panel is like a light tan. You can preserve that color and let that texture shine through if you want for certain aspects of your painting. But I would actually just rely more on your white gouache to get those bright white moments. Hopefully yours isn't as dirty as mine. Yeah, do y'all have any other questions about using gouache, or just like the process of going from your collage to a drawing to starting the process? Okay. Let me know if you have any questions. I have a bunch of colored pencils and also these colorful micron pens that you're welcome to use. If you don't mind, just take one, because I don't think I have enough for everyone to like grab more than one. But these are pretty nice. That being said, with your drawing, I'm not sure if these are waterproof or not. I might test that. Okay, I think they're waterproof. Just destroying this painting, that's okay. So yeah, if you want to use one of these, you'll be able to cover it up with your gouache. I would just choose, a lighter color with your with a colored pencil. I really prefer this to using graphite, because graphite is gonna spread around.
It makes the color mushy, kind of.
Yeah, it muddles your color. It makes your color less vibrant. So please use a colored pencil or a colorful micron pen instead for your drawing. If you make your drawing, like if you mess up, I goofed up some sections, but I, like here, you can see, I just made a more confident mark where it was supposed to be. So I recommend starting very light with your colored pencil and then getting darker as you gain more confidence. But also let me know if you're just having trouble with your drawing or sort of need help in any part of the process. Cool. Well, thank Thanks, y'all. Thank you.